record over here. So here's what I think is hilarious. What I think is hilarious is I come up with a 90-day challenge and my wife comes up with the first topic. And, like I'm getting some great stuff. I've been getting great stuff ever since I put out the 90-day challenge. And then my wife goes, hey, why don't you make your first one about teaching your sons about consent? And at that point, my heart dropped right into my stomach. And I thought I just wanted to go crawl into a corner because nothing like heavy lifting the first time. And this topic has really, really forced me to look inside. This topic seems so loaded for people, and it came off super loaded for me too. And I've been doing nothing but thinking about it. I called a bunch of friends yesterday. I literally was super nervous about doing this live presentation. I called my friend Jeff, who's sitting 180 degrees away from this camera right now, because I felt like this is emotionally super charged. So let's talk about consent, right? Like it's time we had this conversation. What I notice is the conversation has been is that I see in the media and generally is we should have conversations with our sons about consent. We should open up a conversation about consent for both boys and girls. We should, do this, that, and the other thing. Why don't more boys and girls? Why don't parents, specifically, why don't fathers have this conversation? And it's time to stop talking about the we should do this. It's time to actually just get into it and dig into it and like what stops us from having it and how are we going to address it? How are we going to really just jump in and really own it? So here's what's so for me is like when I grew up, so I grew up in the 70s. This didn't exist as a conversation. It's not that consent didn't exist, but the idea of having a conversation about consent didn't exist. So I grew up, I live on the West Coast now, but I didn't grow up here. I grew up on the East Coast where I grew up in what they would call a waspy blue blood house where such things are not spoken of. We don't talk about things like that. That is not part of polite conversation. But it's also some of the most important conversations that you could otherwise have. I've been trying to find a parallel, like what would be a parallel for our parents of the time where we, a parallel where they wouldn't have known how to have the conversation with us. And I found one. It's not a direct correlation, but I found one. It was a conversation about AIDS. I learned about AIDS in a sophomore high school class. And I learned a high school science class. And my science teacher was the one who told us about it. I'd never heard of it before. My parents didn't say a thing about it until the riots in New York City and San Francisco from the gay community. And that, finally the CDC acknowledged that it actually existed. And they seemed just as lost as I was. And they were absolutely no help and had no insight or advice or even an invitation to a conversation about it. And so they were lost. And I was lost, but instead of exploring it together, we all just kind of kept to ourselves. So ill-equipped to have about the conversation for consent, ill-equipped, I stepped into adolescence. Ill-equipped, I stepped into my teens. Ill-equipped, I stepped into my high school and college years. I was reflecting the other day in a conversation that consent just wasn't a conversation you had. It didn't mean that it wasn't there. It was just that it was never explicitly talked about. And so it was always implied, but it would be inauthentic to say that there weren't some times like, am I doing the right thing? Is this okay with them? I don't know. But I didn't ask, right? Like I didn't ask. And when I got into my sort of early sexual experiences, I was constantly learning on the fly, like you do, trying to take the advice of the locker room guys, which never worked out very well for anybody, and make use of it and make my way. And it was awkward and it was uncomfortable. And very often I was left not knowing if I was a good lover, if I had met their needs, and sometimes even if they enjoyed it. Like, I just didn't know. There was a lot of awkward silences. There was a lot of awkwardness. Let's just say that. That was probably most of my teenage years. And in light of no information, I just made up stories about how it was. Like, maybe I was great. Maybe I was awful. I just don't know. I just don't know. And so I'm like, they didn't say anything, or they did say something, and I just was left in the not knowing. I had one very specific experience with consent, and I want to share it with you because it really pointed to the heart of the matter. I met an amazingly wonderful, funny, beautiful young woman when I was in college, and we spent several days together, and we enjoyed the heck out of each other's company, and we spent long periods of time together. And on a Saturday, we finally kissed for the first time, and we started kissing, and it was very passionate, and we really enjoyed each other. And at one point we found ourselves together in a bedroom, and before we knew it, over a period of time, we were both naked. There we were both naked, and we seemed to be enjoying each other. And what seemed like all of a sudden, she said to me, "I'm not comfortable. I don't want to do this." And I looked back and I was confused. And I looked back and I said, and I thought to myself, we seem to have been enjoying each other. There's no drugs or alcohol involved. We're consenting adults, we were adults in this conversation. Everything seemed to be going in the way that we both, there was no anything going on, but something shifted for her. And that's what it was. Something just shifted for her. And where she had been comfortable before, she was no longer comfortable. And that was just the what was so, right? Like, that was the what was so. And I ended up leaving a room at her request, which was perfectly fine. And I was left with, what did I do? What did I do wrong that had her be so excited about being together, and then what seemed like all of a sudden to me, have her not? And I didn't ask. So I don't know. If you notice that I'm looking off camera, this is actually nerve-wracking enough that I actually took some notes so I could continue talking about this. In light of no communication, when we don't talk about these issues, when we don't talk about sex, when we don't talk about consent, when we don't talk about what you like, what you don't like, what's okay with you, what's not okay with you, we're left in a place of not knowing, making up stories, and making big assumptions. I know I was left with all kinds of stories about me when I had this conversation with this particular partner, that I had done something wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was, but I do know that at the end of it, she was not, into it. I'm curious, if you're willing, did anybody in your life have a conversation about consent when you were growing up? So type in the chats, like, did it, and if so, who was it? Did someone talk to you about getting consent when you were growing up? Did someone talk to you about, was it your dad? Was it your mom? Was it was it a mentor of yours? Was it somebody from your high school? Was it some adult in your life, like an uncle? Or, I'm curious if anybody else has got a different experience. What we're really getting at is when we operate in silence, we're really getting at the heart of fear of rejection. If I share that I don't feel comfortable, will you reject me? If I ask you, if I tell you I would like to have sex with you, or I would like to be intimate with you, or I'd like to take my clothes off and be with you, at the heart of it, we're really talking about rejection, the fear of rejection, about being told it's not okay, and I'm not interested in you, or you don't do anything for me, or. But I'll tell you what's worse. What's worse is making the assumption that it's okay and then jumping over the line of what's okay for the other person. Also, what's worse is leaving not knowing why it didn't work. There have been times when I've been intimate with somebody and I thought we had fun. And as far as I know, they thought we had fun, but I don't know. And once again, in the absence of information, my brain makes up stories. And those stories usually aren't so good. Like, it was great. I seem to have a good time, but I'm not so sure about them. We have to open this conversation up. We have to have frank conversations about sex. We have to have conversations about worthiness too. Like, we get rejected in the world. We tell kids, go out and take a big chance, and if you fail, it's going to be fine because you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and it's all going to be fine. Well, if it was that frickin' simple, adults would be doing it too. But we tell our kids to do that, and we don't do it for ourselves. When you have a fear of rejection, like when your worthiness is on the line, when you ask someone to be intimate with you, I think I got something here. When your worthiness is on the line, when you ask someone to be with you, everything's on the line. No wonder you wouldn't ask and hope that it's just going to work out. But you're actually handing your worthiness over to another human being as opposed to holding it for yourself. Your worthiness is an internal knowing and being, and that's what we need to work on for our girls and our boys. This isn't just a boys' conversation. It is a girls' conversation too. We want our girls to own their worthiness as well, to talk about what they want, to talk about what they don't want, to have frank, open conversations about sex, to engage in it if they choose to, not engage with it if they don't, and that their worthiness is not at all attached to their partners. Why would we give up our power, our worthiness, our core sense of worthiness to another human being? There has been so much amazing work and light shined for girls about an internal sense of worthiness. We need to do the same for our boys because they struggle too. I struggled as a boy. Some days I still struggle. But an internal sense of worthiness is something that is so worth fighting for. And that do you really want to be with somebody who is not into what you're into? Do you really want to be with somebody who's kind of like, maybe this is okay? No, we want to be with people who are like, yeah, everything you got going on over there, I want to be part of that. How do we do more of that? Right? Like, I was thinking about the freedom that lives in being able to have a frank conversation. Like, I imagine some of these, like, being a younger adult and having a frank conversation called, like, I'm super excited being with you. I'm super excited generally. And I really want to be intimate with you. And I want to know if that's something that you're on the same page with. And if they say yes, and then go, okay, what do you like? What do you not like? What should I make sure to stay away from? What should I do more of? And by the way, here's what I like. This is what makes me happy. This is what makes me feel good. Oh my God. The freedom and joy and pleasure that can come from that is amazing. When we open the book and open the conversation, when we stop stopping, and start having the conversation, open the book, have the conversation, and be willing to be transparent about it. And here's the truth. If having this conversation freaks you out, good. It means it's an important conversation to have. And you're going to screw it up. I guarantee it. There's going to be something. It may not feel like it came out the way you wanted to. But if you're coming from love and if you're coming from transparency, that's all that matters, because you can't screw it up if you're willing to have the conversation. If you're willing to open the book and go, we need to have a conversation about worthiness and about giving it away. We need to have a conversation about consent and getting what you want and making sure you're not having what you don't want. And that you're having relations with people who are interested in the same thing you're interested in. And if they're not, fantastic. That's good news. Go find somebody who is. It would be so easy to have, it's a consent conversation, but it's not. It's a worthiness conversation. It's a vulnerability conversation. It's a transparency conversation. And it's not a one-off. It's the way we raise our children. If we raise our children to believe that they are worthy of having a self-directed life and they're willing and worthy to have everything without anybody else's permission or approval or anything else, that is a conversation for consent. That is a conversation for possibility. That is a conversation where we're raising unbelievably well-adjusted, middle-aged people who are neither addicted to pills or caffeine or alcohol or anything else. And they're living self-directed lives full of joy and satisfaction. The only mistake we can have, the only way to screw this up is by not having the conversation. The only way we can screw this up is by not having the conversation. When we open the book and have the conversation about worthiness, like boom, right? Every time the bully at school does something to your son, boom, every time they feel down because somebody said something in social media, boom, every time some relative hurts your child's feelings, boom, those are conversations for worthiness. The transition from that conversation to a consent conversation is 1 degree off. But if we don't have that conversation, by the time you're having a consent conversation, there's a lot of ground to make up. And if you haven't, and you're in the midst of discovering that this is what's so for you, then there's no time like today, like tonight, like right away. Like, let's have a conversation about that. Let's have a frank conversation and own the discomfort with it too. Like, own it. Like, dude, I'm so uncomfortable about this. Let me tell you what my experience of, like, growing up with your grandpa, this is how these conversations went, and they were awful. And I would imagine it might feel uncomfortable for you, and it's uncomfortable for me. But if it's uncomfortable, it's because it's the conversation that we need to be having. I'm so effing excited to see men standing up powerfully to stand for their sons, to stand for what's possible for their sons and daughters. The consent conversation feels like it's a son's conversation, but it's also a daughter's conversation. It is about worthiness. It is about consent. But when dads stand up to the same extent the way moms stand up, when dads stand up, we help change the world. And it's so great to be a part of. Now, look, here's the deal. I got a 90-day challenge going on right now. It's called Be My Boss for 90 Days. Any topic that you come up with that you want me to address, I'm going to chase it down. I'm going to be doing live feeds like this. I'm going to be doing YouTube videos. I'm going to be doing blog posts. I'm even going to be doing some podcasts. So you get to be my boss for 90 days. Whatever it is you're struggling with as a parent, as a father, as a man, let me know what that is and I will address it. And you can scoot over to the brand new heroicfatherhood.com site, start to see what we're building over there. It's kind of exciting. And I really love you guys so much. And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And God, I love seeing all these people in the room. Gregory and Sherry and Jeff and Dag and Frank. Oh my God, it's like a who's who of all the people I love. And Hannah. And this is so great. You guys are amazing. And if you're watching this, thank you so much. Thank you so much for standing for your kids, standing for your sons, standing for your daughters. You know, we hold a special and unique role in our families as fathers. And I'm going to talk about more about this later. And we are a foundation level brick that must be present and powerful in our kids' lives. And it can make such a difference when we're willing to stand up and have the uncomfortable conversation, when we're willing to stand up and stand for what we believe and stand for our kids and stand for our spouses and stand for our partners and stand for the decisions we make. And I look forward to being a part of this conversation with you, and you guys rock. And I'll talk to you soon. 90-day challenge. Be my boss. Comments down below. Go to Heroic Fatherhood. All the stuff that goes along with that. Talk to you soon. Bye. Posting a replay. And